The Sony ZV-E10 II short-term review. This is an amazing camera, but it has some things that make me wanna... Okay, that was a bit aggressive, but some things I just hate about this camera. It's been 2 months since I've been testing out the ZV-E10 II, and recently I took it to the Canadian Rockies for its greatest test yet. While this has quickly become one of my favorite cameras, there's definitely some glaring issues that are borderline deal breakers and have me thinking, is this something I want to keep in my toolkit or should I just sell it? As always, there's some photo and video sample files in the description below from my trip if you just want to download them and play around with them in Lightroom or your video editing software. Let's get into it. So first, let's talk pros of the Sony ZV-E10 II, and where it really shines is video. I mean, the 4K 10-bit that comes out of this is what I'm shooting on right now, the A7 IV. You're hard pressed to find the difference in the actual quality of the video files if it's like standalone locked off shots. My friend shot this trip on the A7 IV, so I'll compare some of the footage side by side, and I shot the trip on the Sony ZV-E10 II. One more thing that I really liked about the 4K 10-bit is that it works in S&Q mode, and it allowed me to get some really cool, easy time-lapse shots. Pro number 2 is the price of this thing. It's $999 US, which is absolutely insane. And if you want it with the kit lens, which I kind of recommend because it's only another $100, you can get it for $10.99. The battery life is also heavily improved on this camera, and it's the same battery that my Sony A7 IV takes, so it's super nice that it's interchangeable, and especially on a trip like hiking through the mountains where you want to minimize the weight in your bag. I think I brought 3 batteries and I didn't even get through all of them because the new battery lasts such a long time. Really quick, if you're finding value in this video, it goes a really long way if you could just leave a like. 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much, and let's dive back in. Okay, so since we're on the topic of hiking and travel, the size and portability of this thing is just incredible. It comes in at 292 grams, which for reference, my Sony A7 IV is 659 grams. So my A7 IV is over double the weight of this thing, and my friends were calling this like a baby camera, and while it might be cute, it actually packs a punch. Some of you might be worried about the photo capabilities of this camera, but I definitely took some photos while I was hiking with it. It's a 26 megapixel APS-C sensor, which is absolutely incredible, and it did some wonderful things for me. We'll talk about this sensor a little bit in the cons as well, but I was super happy with the photos that I got out of this camera. And if you're watching this video and you just want to know, can this be a good hybrid option? I actually think it can be, even though it just has an electronic shutter. The next point I want to touch on is, like, I don't want to build out a big rig with this thing, right? So I don't want to have a massive monitor on it. So it's really nice that they added the LUT preview to this, so you can actually see what your S-Log footage is going to look like once you put it on your computer. Another thing is, when you're traveling and hiking in the mountains, is having an external microphone. Yes, it's good for sound quality, but again, this is just cumbersome and just another thing you have to think about. So I was super happy with the omnidirectional mic on this.
Anyone want a little bit of sunscreen on their nose?
I got some.
I'm good. You actually do that again? That a guy.
Safety first, kids.
And it's been upgraded again since the Mark I of this camera came out, which was already good with audio, but now it's even better. Now, I do think that this little toupee hat thing that they put on it, 1, it wasn't that easy to take on and off. 2, it looks really goofy. And 3, I just lost mine in the mountains, so I'm actually gonna have to find a new one. The last few pros that I want to talk about is, number 1, the vertical orientation of this camera. So if you're shooting for social media and things like that, you automatically get the screen to rotate orientation as you rotate it from vertical to horizontal, and I think that's really nice, especially with the updated touchscreen of this camera. It also has a really nice upgraded grip, which I really like, and it's more similar to the feel of a full frame camera, but in a smaller body. And then lastly, I like that they retained the photo, video, and S&Q dial at the top of the camera. Never underestimate the power of a good voiceover. On my recent 3-day hike, I got a lot of insane video footage, but it means nothing if it doesn't tell a story or give context to the viewer. After my trip, I was super excited to get editing the footage from the Sony ZV-E10 II, so I went to Final Cut, and then I often go to Motion Array to get music and sound effects to kind of just spruce up my video, but they also have a new AI voiceover tool that I want to talk about today. They have a large library of different voiceovers that you can use, so I'm I'm sure you'll find something that fits the tone of your video. Once I generated the voiceover, I was able to add color, and this was the final result.
As humans, we do completely irrational things. We wake up at ungodly hours, load 50 pounds to our backs, and voluntarily climb giant rocks while questioning every life decision that led us here. All for that one perfect moment when we reach the top and think, damn, that was totally worth it. Until we remember we have to walk back down.
The best part is that you can adjust your voiceover for speed and emotion, so if you don't get exactly what you're looking for right away, not a big deal. I've already used this feature to run ads for a construction company that I'm currently working with. Those ads performed really well, and no one can tell that it's an AI voiceover. It just sounds like I hired a paid voice actor for it. Use this to inspire your next video idea. The thing I like about Motion Array is that I used it and loved it for so many things already, like motion templates and sound effects and all those kinds of things, but they're always innovating and coming up with new ways to help creators, and I think that's why I align with them so much. So thank you so much, Motion Array, for helping and sponsoring this video, and now let's dive back in. So remember earlier when I said that there were some cons with this camera that made me want to stab it with a knife? Well, here they are. Number one, and probably the biggest borderline deal breaker for me, is the lack of in-body image stabilization, and let me explain a little bit. When I picked up this camera, I actually thought that I was going to be able to bypass this and I'd be totally fine with Catalyst Browse. And if you don't know, that's just Sony's software that allows you to stabilize footage in post, and while it's an extra step, I thought at least that would fix the footage from my hiking adventures. But the biggest problem was I was running into these micro jitters that it kind of looked like Sony's old technology, like the stabilization on my RX 100, and that was really demoralizing for me that Catalyst Browse wasn't able to fix that footage. However, I do think that I found a workaround, and that's, remember how I talked about that $100 lens is probably worth picking up? It's because it's optically stabilized, and a few of Sony lenses are, and I think if you're going to be running this camera around, especially in run and gun style, if you're on a locked off tripod shooting, you're totally fine, but if you are moving a lot with this and need stabilization, you absolutely need a optically stabilized lens. And what I just picked up is a Sony 10 to 18 f4, and what I've found is it eliminates the micro jitters that I was talking about, and with that it makes this camera a whole lot more usable. The only problem with that is on Sony E-mount, there's not a ton of lenses that are actually optically steady shot. The second main issue with this camera is that it doesn't have a mechanical shutter, only electronic. And for some people, that might not be a big deal, but you need to know what the downfalls of an electronic shutter are. Primarily, you get that rolling shutter effect that you would get in video. It makes it look like jello when you're moving the camera left to right and there's, say, a subject walking through the frame. Second, you get something called banding in some lighting conditions indoors, and essentially it's these unflattering black bars through your image, so you're not going to want that either. And lastly, if you do a lot of flash photography, there are limitations with the electronic shutter as well. The next con is overheating, which I don't think you need to worry about too much. Gerald Undone has done a ton of testing on this, but essentially in a wrap, 25 to 35 minutes you're gonna get in outdoor hot situations like 30-degree weather. If there's a breeze, it's gonna last a little bit longer. If there's no breeze, you're probably on that 25-minute mark. And for me, my use case is for a B cam or C cam at weddings, and I don't want to be constantly monitoring it to see if it's gonna overheat. So I'm just mindful of that, but not a huge deal breaker. And yes, this camera is super cheap, so I get that there's drawbacks. Two last things is that this thing doesn't have an EVF. The Sony a6700 does, and that's only $400 more. So if you do have that money and having a EVF but also a mechanical shutter is important to you, I think that $400 value of spending the extra money is probably worth it. So after my 2 months of using the Sony ZV-E10 II, what are my recommendations? Should you buy it? Well, if someone asks me which camera to buy because they're wanting to learn more about video, they're just getting into it and they need something at a budget price, I would definitely say this is the best camera to pick up. If someone said, I'm looking for my first camera and Maddie, I want to shoot a lot of photography because I'm I'm passionate about it, I would say there's a lot of better options and steer clear of this, and I'll put those on the screen now. If someone said, I'm looking for my first camera ever and I'm gonna be shooting a lot of photo and a lot of video, I would say this might be the option for you, but just be mindful of the drawbacks, so hopefully they watch this video and specifically the cons list. If someone wanted a B or C cam to match their Sony colors at a wedding and they're a YouTuber and they just like talking and reviewing cameras, I would say, well, that's just me, and definitely pick it up. If it's any consolation, sometimes when I review these cameras, I want to sell them right away, but with this camera, I actually want to keep it in my arsenal for a while, and I'm not ready to sell it, and I definitely think there's some practical use cases for me. If you're that hybrid shooter and you're curious about the photo capabilities of this camera, I did a full video on it, so please check it out here. Thanks so much for stopping by. I appreciate you, and we'll see you in the next one. Maddie out. Peace.